Welcome to the Creative Chats podcast with Mike Brennan. Well, hey friends, welcome to another episode of Creative Chats. I'm your host, Mike Brennan. This is the podcast for artists, makers, content creators, where we talk about creativity, the creative process, and story. We also talk a lot about entrepreneurship because creative entrepreneurship is something that is very needed as well. And I am excited about today's episode with a friend of mine. But before we get there, if you'd like to connect with me, you can do so over on my website, which is mikebrennan.me. I'd love to have you be part of the Daily Creative Habit community. There is a free Facebook group. You can find the link over on my website as well, and I'll put that in the show notes. And I want to just invite you into the ecosystem. If you're someone who is a creator of any kind, but you're struggling with showing up consistently, maybe you're having a hard time prioritizing for your creative efforts. Maybe you've been dreaming of some things for a while and you start and stop and start and stop. There are ways that we can help you get forward, get you moving, and keep moving. And so I would love to be able to connect with you and help you on your own creative journey. So go to my website, mikebrennan.me or dailycreativehabit.com, and I look forward to connecting with you more there. Now, for this episode, I get to sit down with my friend, Angie Callen. And Angie is someone who I met at the Thing event, which was this past November. She was a fellow speaker, and I could tell immediately that we had some shared values of authenticity and just, when you vibe with somebody and there's going to be some great conversation. And so I had the pleasure of being on her podcast, and she's now on mine. And she is someone who helps people with their career changes, but she's also going through some changes herself, evolving into some things, still within the career path and career coaching, but kind of leveling up in some things. And so we get real candid and real vulnerable and authentic in our conversation today about choosing your career path and navigating those waters, and even how sometimes we create things that become our own golden handcuffs or prisons, and we evolve past that. What do we do? Because we're known for one thing, or because we get our livelihood from one thing, and yet our heart and our lives seem to be going in a different direction. How do we navigate that? There's so many good points that are talked about in this episode, so much great conversation. I think it's going to speak to you no matter what you do for a living, whether you identify as an artist, a musician, a chef, an entrepreneur, whoever you are in the world. I'm sure you're creating something. And so this episode can speak to you exactly where you're at. So without further ado, here is my creative chat with Angie Callen. Well, Angie, welcome to the Creative Chats podcast, my friend. This is going to be exciting.
Thank you for having me. I don't know why you let an engineer on a Creative Chat podcast, but we're going to have fun anyway.
Oh my goodness. No, you know what? Honestly, I love the fact, I think you even have, I was looking at your website and the about page, and you mentioned on there something about like you had over 40 different jobs or something like that. That's true?
Well, if I counted, probably.
Yeah.
So the first thing you may have seen is I'm actually a former engineer who loves people. So there you go. There's my claim to fame and why I am a former engineer. And because of that, I've always just tried to find, I would say, where I fit. And if I actually counted, Mike, it might be 40 jobs. At least between my husband and I, we've definitely had that many, because Career Benders, my company, is the 13th entrepreneurial endeavor alone. So my whole career, and there was the creative side of me that felt like I was dying as an engineer, by the way. Preview, spoiler alert, I always had a side hustle. Like everything from like, I'm going to sell Mary Kay to, I can be a business consultant, like just everything under the sun. That is a common theme that I finally realized about myself and where my kind of creative outlet tends to show up. And so, yeah, it probably is something like 40 if you count all of those.
Well, my point in that, bringing that up, was that you strike me as someone who is looking to create the life that you want to live. And sometimes that means making choices that aren't popular choices, aren't what everyone else is doing, and doing things because they seem like the right next step for you in creating the life you want to live. And so I think, there's certainly a stigma against a lot of change, right? I mean, people who are like, what, you can't focus. You can't, like, what's wrong with you? That's that kind of thing that comes up a lot of times. I think even as people who, maybe listening to this have gone to art school or somehow in the creative field for their job, they may have bounced around different types of things creatively. One time they were doing photography and now they're doing design, or now they're doing copywriting, or now they're doing, and so this whole idea of like, pick one thing, drill down on that, stay with that the rest of your life, that certainly seems like a sentence as opposed to a career path for a lot of people.
And luckily
So
it's a dying one.
yes, 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 yes. So I'm glad that you stand out to say, like, yes, I've been making these choices, and yes, I've been evolving and using creativity to create the life and the path that you want, right? So what about that journey has been most surprising to you?
You know what I actually think? I'm gonna pull a couple things together.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I look back at the 13 side hustles and the theme and the thread that was weaved between all of them, what surprises me most is that in that very observation you made about me wanting to create the life that I want to have and being intentional about that and taking chances and and risk and embracing change. What I have found through all of that is that's my purpose for others. And I think it's to help others and empower others to do the same. Years and years ago, this all started when I used to live on the East Coast and I was practicing as a civil engineer, which is the everybody's proud of you. You're the wow in the, at the party, like the female engineer. And also, East Coast major cities, you tend to really attach an identity to what you do for work.
Yes.
And I made the decision to move to the mountains of Colorado. I got a chance to transfer to Breckenridge, Colorado. The office was at the bottom of the ski hill. I wanted to have access to skiing. And I remember people telling me, like, oh my gosh, that's my dream. You're living my dream. Why are you getting to do what I've always wanted to do? And I remember sitting there thinking in the back of my head, like, well, who am I? You could do this too. And it opened my eyes to this sense of like mediocrity that we tend to accept in our lives, that I just have to do this thing. I have to do this job that's just fine. And I just have to do, versus taking charge of our lives and our career paths that we have more agency and control over than people tend to realize or exercise, even if they do realize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because I think we're so ingrained with things, the norms. This is the way you're supposed to do it. This is how everyone else does it. This is that can squash this sense of curiosity, of freedom, probably a little rebellion, right?
Mhm.
There's this sense of, is this all there is? Because if this is all there is, ew, like this isn't
Uh-huh.
working. And so I think that feeds perfectly into creativity, because then it's like you have to create your own path. You have to create your own systems a lot of times, and also create a lot of things around you to keep encouraging you, because the voices of the norm want to tear against that. Probably because of a couple of things. One, because you are willing to step out and do what nobody else is doing. And the other thing is that sense of, almost like what you said before, like, why do you get to do that? Like, a little jealousy, maybe a little bit of like, I wish I could, but I feel like I can't because I'm so shackled with responsibility and
Mhm.
practicality and all the heavy things, right? I mean, what kept you going in the face of that kind of just opposition, maybe internally, externally, both?
Well, and I mean, none of this was easy by any means. I mean, there's some low of the lowest in, in the years of trying to find that purpose, pulling the threads and figuring out what the career path should be. Complete financial ruin. We went bankrupt in some of this kind of transition. And so I don't, like, that's the thing, is that it isn't easier, but is it more fulfilling? 100%. I get to have a lifestyle and I get to help other people have, like, see that that's possible, and that never would have happened if I stayed small. And that's what I think that we are really really good at doing, is staying small. I actually saw a friend of mine who's also a coach had a little meme on LinkedIn this morning, and she had written on a post-it note, your career doesn't have to make any sense to anyone else other than you, which I thought was so powerful, because we let by default others control it or dictate it. And it doesn't mean you have to go start a business in order to take control, but it does mean thinking through what you want in life and having a career path and an employer who aligns with that vision and those values. And that's where you get to have creativity in your career, your vocation, how you use your gifts, how you use your purpose, whether they're artistic, creative or not.
Yeah, I love that. And, unfortunately for me, I didn't identify a bigger goal or the target, really the bullseye of the target when I was younger. I went to art school and knew, okay, yes, I want to use my creativity for my livelihood. And it was graphic design, and graduated and didn't really think like, okay, here's the company that I want to work, or here's what this work looks like. Here's the what I value underneath the skill set of what I'm doing. It was simply like, okay, well, I want to make money off of like me being creative. And so it's design and so I think because of that, I floundered around a lot in the beginning. And, you have that cycle of you're in a job, you are there for a couple of years, maybe 5 tops, and you hit the ceiling for whatever it is. Maybe it's you can't go any further because of your skill set or because of the staff around you. Maybe management changes, maybe the company itself changes somehow. There's a million different reasons, or maybe you just get bored, right? And then you're like, okay, let me try something else somewhere else. And then you kind of keep hopping around, hoping that with each hop, you will just increase the salary and the benefits, and that life will be great. And somehow the next one will be the one that kind of scratches the itch for me. Maybe that'll be it, right? Do you see this in a lot of people, even outside of speaking creative services or industry?
Literally have an engineering manager who I am having this conversation with right now. So that should tell you that it happens kind of across the spectrum. And here's the thing, when we're younger, we don't know ourselves well enough not to flounder. And depending on your generation, when we were younger, the societal norm was even more rigid and had these expectations of you pick a job, you pick a career and you do it, and maybe you change jobs once. And all of that has changed so significantly due to millennials pushing against that norm, the presence of technology, the acceptance of entrepreneurship and small business as a career track, right? There's so much about the professional world that has opened up for us to be able to lean in and explore these things that for some people, they're just now realizing that availability is there. But for a lot of people, I find I don't know whether it's a midlife crisis or a midlife realization, but when we get to our late 30s, early 40s, let's say between 38 and 45, there tends to be this sense of knowing that has accumulated over the years. And people get to a point of saying, wait a minute, do I want to do the same thing for the second half that I did for the first half? And now I have enough information under my belt to design or explore or lean into a more intentional second half. I
Yeah.
had somebody once say the term that she felt like a career tumbleweed. And I was like, that is the best phrase I've ever heard somebody say, because you could totally vision this idea of just like, oh yeah, I just kept hopping and hopping and hopping and hopping and never stopping to say, is that a door I want to walk through? And to some extent, I'm a big fan of that, because I also think we can put like super tunnel vision on and have a too specific goal and miss a better opportunity that could have happened years before. But the flip side can also happen, that we just kind of like float in the wind until we realize like, oh man, I've been floating in the wind with no tether.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, certainly there's a lot of self-awareness that is needed, because to examine your motivations, to examine, like you mentioned before, doing things on purpose with intentionality, and that's something that's important to me as well. I think because of the times when I didn't operate like that and realized, oh, I drifted to places that I didn't intend to go, and then woke up one day going, how did this happen? That's a painful lesson, and one that you try not to repeat, but unfortunately sometimes that's just what happens. But I think even to back when I was making career choices, right? I went, starting even with school. My dad was a New York City detective, and so going to him saying, I'm going to art school, the conversation, of course, going, excuse me, like, as a matter of fact, there's a kind of a joke where he was teaching at the police academy, which was a couple of blocks away from one of the campuses of the School of Visual Arts where I went. And this is like earlier on in my life, and he would be there with his fellow cops, and they would be on the roof or something, or taking a break, and they'd look over and they'd see all these artists people over there, and they'd be like, look at these bunch of weirdos, like, and then he's like, no kid of mine's ever gonna go something like that. And meanwhile, like, that's the exact school that I ended up going to years later. right? It's so funny. Yeah. But this pressure of coming out of a system of like the things that my dad and even just a lot of my family value different things.
Mhm.
So the choices that they made, which, again, it's not right or wrong. It is what it is. And that's a personal thing. But it was always like, get a government job, get a pension, do the work, like get stability, get, all the things that they pour into. And then they say, and then when you retire, then you can do whatever you want to do. And then you go places, then you want to build another business, whatever. And I was like, ooh, like, that doesn't feel like me. I don't want that. And so you make different choices, and it's hard even sometimes to make those choices in the midst of family structures and societal structures that say that's not how you're supposed to do it. The fear is a big thing,
Yes.
I think, that stops people. Can you think of maybe someone who you have helped navigate through those kind of spaces, and maybe some things, some pointers at which, or even maybe if somebody was coming to you now and saying, hey, can you help me get my head around this? How do I move past this and not let this fear block me in this?
You said the word values, which I think is super, super, super important to all of this. And again, something that we don't necessarily have enough internal awareness around to like even know we should have, let alone be able to articulate. And that's really what I find roots us when we get to this point of wanting change, or we get to this point of like, I am so far off the pendulum, I don't know where to go. And here, the fear is what did I say at the thing, Mike? What's on my little thing that you drew for me? Fear will hold you back more than anything else in life ever will. Fear is what keeps us small. And what I find helps people in general is leaning into those fear and proving them wrong. Because typically it's the caveman response of like, oh, if I do anything, the saber-toothed tiger is going to come attack me. So I better turn around and run back to the cave. Guess what? We don't have saber-toothed tigers anymore. So what I find is this is going to sound strange. Leaning into what actually is the worst case scenario is oftentimes a really good way to debunk the myths or the barriers that we create in our own mind, because we tend to have that fear response that goes there. So, for instance, I have this client that is in the process of transitioning out of a big career, who people are like, what are you doing, you have it made, but he isn't fulfilled. There is burnout, there is stress, and the fear of change is real. But what we have to realize is like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Are you going to starve if you don't have a job for 6 months? Are you going to burn the bridge from the company that you're leaving so badly that if you had to go back, you couldn't? And no, all of those are no's. And so we get into this case that if you actually look at what could really not happen, it starts to make what could happen seem even more appealing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you stress that, because I've often thought about that in terms of taking action and pushing through, like you said. I mean, because really, even if you quote fail, you have more experiences to inform you, and you realize, I'm still here. I'm still going. So then you add, like you said, what's the worst that could happen? And I think the more that you practice that, the less hold that has on you. And even the more loss you've experienced in life, the less hold it has on you, because you're like, I've been through so much already and I'm still here. I think it's okay to take this step that seems scary right now. Repetition of that is huge, I think, right?
Yeah, failure is the other. Fear and failure are two things we are really good at. And I think the failure is very much attached to this, just society, like the perfectionism kind of thing that we can't ever lose. And it's the worst thing you could do for yourself, because if you're not failing, you're not learning. And the more, in a way, the more you fail, the thicker skin you grow, and the more stuff rolls off your back. And the next time you go through a hard thing, the tolerance of what is a hard thing completely changes, and that threshold continues to go up and up and up, because you can look at your own historical data and prove yourself wrong, that hey, doomsday is unlikely to happen because I failed there, and look, absolutely nothing happened and nobody even noticed, because everybody's got their heads up their own wheres, right? And so that's why I think it's so important to take the agency that we have but squander too often, because the chances of that going wrong in the long run are essentially zero. Doesn't mean it's going to go perfectly. And yes, there will be slip ups and failures, but all of those will inform the in the long run destination that helps us be who we're really supposed to be, show up in the world the way we're meant to, and impact other people using those gifts the way we're intended and designed.
Yes. And I love that you use the word agency, because I think that is something that helps us give handles to this, and saying, don't like usher that responsibility off to somebody else or expect somebody else to make these decisions for you. It's having ownership, having agency over yourself. And again, it goes back to intention and purpose, right? It's that stuff of, yes, this is what I want things to look like for my career or my life or what I'm creating, and going, I'm going to do this. I'm going to lean in. I'm going to take the perceived risks, and then I'll assess. And if I need to course correct, then I course correct, right? I mean, of course, it sounds less scary when we talk about this, but yet when we're facing new opportunities, we all, I think, have that moment where we flinch a bit. But like you said, I think practicing it, that's helpful, right?
What have you got to lose? Like, really, what have you got to lose versus what do you have to gain? And sometimes I'll throw the following question at somebody to make them think forward is like, what is your future self going to regret? So we'll do this like if somebody's looking at a job or they want to start a business. And I'll say, well, if in 5 years you haven't done this, or in 6 months, if you turn down this job and don't get a better one, are you going to regret it? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. And we've all heard of the book, the 6 Regrets of the Dying. Nobody ever says, I wish I made more money. I wish I had worked more. It's almost always a regret around something that you didn't do. What have you got to lose? Because you can always go back to what you know, but you won't know what you don't know unless you step out and try.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Some people listening today might be in the place of they're not there yet, meaning they want to be in a place where they're making their livelihood, they're living off of what they're creating. And so whether that's a visual artist, a musician, a dancer, a chef, like whatever that looks like for this person in their creative efforts, it's not supporting them. And they're struggling with a couple of things. One, they're struggling with terminology because they don't feel like a quote real artist or a real musician or whatever, because for them, they've identified you have to be able to make a soul living off of that in order to own that title. Or they're struggling with this thought of, I'm doing the thing, it's in process, which I'm okay with, but I have to bolster that up with a bunch of other jobs and other things because I can't really rely on this thing yet. And so maybe I'm teaching as well as doing this. Maybe I have another part-time job somewhere else doing this. And the struggle is I feel lesser than because I can't just say, this is what I do and this is who I am. Is there anything helpful that you might be able to speak into this person right now who's listening, hanging on by a thread maybe, or feeling the frustration?
You get to choose which foot you lead with. And what I mean by that is just because you have 3 jobs doesn't mean you have to identify as a trifecta. You get to go and own the identity that you want to have now and going forward. So just because your art doesn't pay you full time doesn't mean you're not an artist. It doesn't mean you're lesser than an artist who is. And it also doesn't mean that when you go and meet somebody, you have to say, I'm an artist, but. It doesn't have to come with a qualification or a caveat, as long as you own it and you know in yourself that's how you identify and that's your truth. You don't have to compromise that or qualify that for anybody other than yourself. But what I will say is if you're in that place, you have to make sure that that identity has time to thrive and grow and that you're working towards making it your whole. And so if those other things become more distractions than they do a bridge, you have to evaluate where you're spending your time and your energy so that the identity you really want to have doesn't get overshadowed and lost.
So good. Yes, yes. I'm clapping right now. Clap.
Even I'm sitting here going, man, that was a good soundbite.
That is, yes, that is a good word. And I think that's helpful for people. I feel like your experience as an entrepreneur has given you lenses to be able to experience that firsthand and then talk about that. Is that true?
I just got a little chills when you said that, because I tell people all the time there is no better exploration into self-discovery than entrepreneurship. And you just hit the nail on the head as to why. And it's because we fail. It's because you have to push yourself in ways you wouldn't have before. It's because you got to operate in areas that you're weak when you're a solopreneur and you're wearing all of the hats. And it's because there's a vulnerability, no matter what kind of entrepreneurship you're in, you are putting a piece of you out there that leaves you exposed. And that can be a little bit of a scary feeling, but that comes back to that idea of it also helps you build a thicker skin. And so I would say 100%, I have, that is part of the lens with which I look at all of these things. And I think I'm better for it, right? There's some stuff about myself I wish I didn't have to know. However, I am a better, more whole, authentic human because I know it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I can echo that because I feel like I backed into it. Someone when I was younger said, you should have your own business. You should be an entrepreneur. And I was like, oh, like, yikes. That feels gross. That feels scary. Right. And so the safe path was just go work for somebody else until finally things happened. And then you find yourself in a place of like, oh, actually, I am leaning into this entrepreneur thing and even learning how to build a personal brand and all these surrounding yourself with a lot of people who are doing things in real time and pivoting and sharing knowledge and skill sets and opportunities. And then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, there's another level here. Like even as an artist, as a creative person, it's not just simply having the talent and the ability to create the art, but then there's the business side, which is being a creative entrepreneur, which means this is a business. It's not a hobby. There needs to be things in place and there are a lot of things to learn, but it is the journey. And part of that journey too, which I think you touched on, was sitting in it long enough where you start going, how do I talk about this? How do I see myself and how do I talk about myself when I'm maybe like I went to a business networking meeting yesterday. It was kind of like a last minute thing. And I jumped in there and I'm like, oh, it's been a while since I've been in here. And everybody stands up and they have their like 60 seconds to give their little,
Yeah.
like, here's who I am and here's what I do. Here's what I'm looking for. And so I started sweating. I was like, oh, we're going around the tables or whatever. And I'm like, why am I so nervous right now? I'm like, I know who I am. I know what I do, and it's a little bit of like, which foot are you going to lead with? Because I do a couple of different things. I'm like, what's appropriate for this? So it's funny because even in those instances, you continually assess and learn and lean into it and go like, okay. And what's the worst that happens? You say the wrong words in 60 seconds and somebody doesn't really get a good picture of who you are and what you do. Then hopefully you mingle and you get a chance one-on-one to do those things, right?
We even had that conversation in the green room before because I didn't do my homework and fill out my form. And I'm like, what do you need to know, Mike? And he's like, I need to know this. And I'm like, I don't know an answer to that right now. Because I'm in a point of like transition almost like trying to figure out how I would identify in that kind of opening statement and the typical like I am that's like so defined kind of a thing, and getting comfortable or maybe comfortably uncomfortable with what I want and feel that I am now identifying with in order to like tell you how to introduce me. So I think that's full circle. We both had that moment in the last 24 hours. I can appreciate that.
That's so good. Yes. And the thing is, I think my experience has told me that you make an attempt, you take a stab at something, and then you live with it for a little bit. It's
Mhm.
like buying some new clothes and you're like, oh, those look good. And you're like,
Breaking in
all right,
new shoes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you're like, you take them home and you put them on and you're kind of like, all right, I'm going to test them out for a little bit. And then all of a sudden you're like, they kind of hurt a little bit. I don't know. This is an exact fit. I mean, we're close, but something's a little off. So then you try something else. And I think that's the thing that there's freedom to be able to do because you're the person who's in the driver's seat and you need to own that. You need to dig down deep enough. You need to have the time with yourself to unpack things so that you're not just getting an answer for having an answer's sake, because I think that's a dangerous place to be too, right?
Yeah, and you said something a few minutes ago I was thinking about where you're in entrepreneurship now, but it took a while to get here. And I feel like this is where you're meant to be, right? We are where we're meant to be, but it took the journey to arrive at this destination that we're going to hang out with for a little while, right? Life, there is no final destination. And I truly believe there is somewhere like that we're supposed to be. And I totally agree that sometimes you're meant to be in limbo and the discomfort that creates in order to figure it out. But I also think we're really good at fighting that journey instead of flowing with it. And so we tend to prolong the arrival at that kind of, this is what I'm really supposed to be doing. And while the information you gather along the journey kind of informs the lens with which you attack it, I also think we're really good at keeping ourselves from getting there for whatever reasons and barriers we put in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so often, I think one of the reasons why I love to explore this sometimes is asking people, like, what did you do when you were a kid? Like, what are the things that lit you up? And even if it's not like, hey, my career is using building blocks, but no, okay, it's not a one for one, but the process of building you really enjoy. And that was identified when you were a kid. That's something to pay attention to and to realize about your motivations. And then also, like, what we talked about briefly before, as far as it's a lot of times you're talking to the person who you were maybe 10, 15 years ago,
Mhm.
going, I wish I had the knowledge that I have today back then. Well, I can't do anything about that, but what I can do is at least share that with other people who are where I was 10, 15 years ago, right?
And or start using that information for yourself at this very second, because you cannot do anything about anything before this moment except for what you use that information and how you use that information to go forward. Don't set yourself further back by just waiting longer. Listen
Yeah.
to the intuition that you were given. I think we're also good at quieting the gut feeling and getting too much in our heads. Lean into it. When you see common themes or recurring stuff that pops up, pay attention, because eventually you're going to be made to pay attention. And that's that kind of, either you can fight it or you can flow it. One way or the other, you're going to get there.
Yes. I think there are many, many stories of people, myself included, where you're made to pay attention because, you suddenly didn't have that staff position because you were let go. And now you're in this place of, I thought I was going to ease into entrepreneurship. I thought it was going to look this way, but now, no, actually it looks this completely different way. Keep moving, keep learning, keep growing, keep evolving. And, I think that's a good pivot point for our conversation for a minute, talking about evolution of things and looking forward, right? Are there anything that you're thinking about right now that maybe something you'd love to create, something that you'd love to do that you're not doing? And what might that be?
Something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time and finally pissed or got off the pot to do, right? So this totally goes into this conversation and why that kind of like, what do I call myself right now feels so real and raw. It's because it's actively happening. And so, for the last 7 years, I have identified, or I would have told you when you asked me what to call me, Mike, I would have said I'm the founder and principal of a career services company called Career Benders, and we offer career coaching and professional development services to professionals of all walks of life. That's what I would have said. I knew what that was for 7 years. And now I'm at the point where for the last 2 of those 7, have known what all of that work has led me to. And what I'm meant to be doing is teaching and training and inspiring those people, right? So moving into like train the trainer, it just feels like such an audacious, very big thing to go in and say, hey, I got better training and professional development for coaches than what's already out there, that I hesitated for a long time to lean into something that really felt like it was where the journey was taking me. And just in this month, launched it.
Hmm.
And so the modern coach is out there. It is happening now, whether I like it or not. And you know what's really funny about it, and what ties back into this whole conversation, is I arrived at the point it needed to happen. And I had like, it was a 2 or 3 month ramp up, not a 2 or 3 year ramp up. It was 2 or 3 years in here. And then it was like, this is just supposed to happen now and I have to do it. Right. Instead of like, I'm going to plan this for another 2 years from now. I just arrived at the point where the signs were there. People were asking for what I knew I was going to put out there. And the recurring theme kept coming at me. And I'm like, I have to lean into this and I have to do it. And it is like the next scary step in the entrepreneurial journey, to pivot, to reinvent, to put the next new thing out there, especially after being known as one way for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so there's a very real time answer to that question.
Yeah. I appreciate that. And I know you value authenticity. And so it doesn't shock me that you're willing to go there, but thank you nonetheless. And I think also, to your point of when you're being known for something and then you have to pivot, or you're desiring to evolve to something else, that's a scary place. And even a lot of people listening may feel that on the creative side of, I paint a certain style and certain subject matter, or I create around certain topics and themes, and that's what's gotten attention and that's what's gotten me some success. And now I feel like it's become a little bit of a prison because that's what people expect of me. And yet my interests have grown out of that. And now I feel like I'm stuck because that's what's making me some money, or that's what's getting me some fame or notoriety or whatever. And yet I want to go somewhere different. I want to evolve and change. It's the curse of musicians too, right? Where, the first album comes out and it's a smash hit. Everybody's like, this is incredible. This is great. And then the sophomore one comes out and people are like, what did you do? This is
Yep.
horrible. Like, why did you change? We want the first thing. We want more of the first thing. That's so hard, but it's so necessary as the person who is creating and living your life, choosing the steps that you take of what you want your life and your work to look like, to listen to that, like you said.
And I'll tell you, I feel even though I'm not an artist, I have now decided to embrace the fact that I have creativity in me, but it comes up in ideating businesses and helping people figure out how to turn an idea into like a program or an offering that somebody will buy. And that's the stuff I realized in building I want to say my first entrepreneurial endeavor, but the first 7 years of this endeavor. And then like it tapped into like, oh wow, this is how I'm supposed to use it next. And so even though I'm not in an artist space, the creative component of that feels very challenged in being in that limbo of I have a business that is our whole existence financially. My husband works for me. I bought us the house. Like in a way, I have a little bit of a shackle that I've created for myself, but I know I have to go do this thing. And so there's like there's an incremental shift that is happening instead of a, turn the page one day. And it is a frustrating place to be as an entrepreneur, as a creative, and as an artist when you're doing one thing and know you want the other, and you really have to manage your energy when doing it, because I notice that the things I know I'm not going to do in the long run take a lot more energy than they used to, because it isn't where I really, really want to be. And so I try to balance the two so that I'm not getting completely drained, but then I'm also not saying, throw all caution to the wind and saying, well, I'm only going to do the things that are good, because that's the practicality,
Right.
that we have to bring to the table instead of just jumping off the ledge with no parachute.
Yes. And it is such a delicate balance to things. But I think a lot of that goes back to what we were talking about as far as listening to yourself, really, and taking time to check in with yourself, practice self-awareness, because all those things are not found outside of you. No one's going to tell you, here's the right next step, or here's the opportunity that's coming 2 months from now. It's all figure out the best next steps, exercise wisdom, and take calculated risks as much as you can, and keep moving, keep going, keep creating. And I think, with the things that you're doing now, and you even saying like you've been prepared for, like you were doing things earlier, you were creating things because you felt like, okay, this seems like a natural next step for me. And it was maybe less scary. It was just an additional service or offering or something, a product. And you lean in, you learn a new skill set, or you figure out the process in that, and then you go, okay, cool. Now you're at a point where you reach back and go, oh, okay, so that was actually training ground for something that I need to now
Yep.
employ here. So it gave me what I needed before I actually needed it. And that is a tremendous gift. But that only happened because you were listening, because you were willing to step up and do the work. Right.
Mm-hmm. I love the term training ground, by the way. I'm gonna have to use that later today. But yes. And I also think I think I'm gonna add something to the listening. You cannot hear if you're not listening. But also there has to be a level of trust that you have in yourself, that even if you're not where you want to be, if you listen long enough, you'll hear. I think that's also it, is being okay that you haven't arrived yet, but trusting that you're going the direction that you want, or that you feel is right for you, because no one else is going to advocate for you and your art and your creativity and your life and your best interest. No one. You may have somebody that goes out and sells your stuff. However, no one will advocate for you the way you can. And that's the best thing that you can do for yourself, is to take agency and keep moving forward, trusting
Yes.
that you're going where
Yes.
you're meant to be.
That's a good one too. And just being vulnerable and honest on this side as well. I'm here in a new place. I moved to Nashville September, and I took all my stuff with me, and I'm now in a place where nobody knows me. Nobody knows my art. And so I had to make the choice and continually make the choice of, like, even yesterday I was at 2 networking events, and then the night before that I was at another one. And some of that could seem a little exhausting, and you go like, oh boy, that's a lot of peopling, and that's a lot of things to get out there and find out who's who and what's happening and all that. But I'm like, that's what I need to do right now. And trust that as I do that, as I meet people, as I hear about opportunities, continue to take the right next steps. Because if I just simply chose to stay here in my room and say, they'll come find me. I mean, I've got stuff out on Instagram and social media. I've got stuff on my website. I've been doing this for so long. People have to know what I do by now and have to see things and know what's available. And, it's like, it doesn't work that way. And if I don't trust myself, then I'm going to shortchange myself and short circuit the whole thing, because I won't go out and do those things. I won't meet new people. I won't take advantage of new opportunities. And that's exactly what I need to be doing right here in this place. So this stuff
I'm sitting over here going, heck yeah, bring me the networking events. I super extrovert, loves to work a room. But you're 100% right in that you could either look at the move to Nashville as, oh crap, I don't know anybody, or man, I don't know anybody, and look at it as an opportunity, which is exactly what you're doing. But you have to lean into that and take action in order to leverage the opportunity that you have in redefining your art in a new place.
Yes. Yeah. And trust of yourself in the work that you do and in the processes that you've put forward, and being nimble enough to go, okay, if I need to change something, I'm going to change. I'm going to process this as I'm going. But it's active. It's the agency piece. I'm not worried about trusting myself, because then if I don't start with that, the rest of it doesn't come,
Bingo.
Yeah.
That's it.
So good. So good.
Brilliant, Mike.
I love it. It's funny. I always say I love to follow curiosity in these conversations. And, sometimes I have some questions that I are my go-tos that prompt some things and kind of get the dam flowing, if you will. But, I knew that we had enough rapport and relationship to go, like, we could drop down in and just kind of see what happens. And I absolutely love where this conversation has gone today. I think it's going to be helpful for so many people. And we're being real and honest with where we're both at in the midst of this too. And I think that helps make it less scary for people and realize that they're not alone also, which is huge. As we're kind of tying this up, putting a bow on it, if people have been listening today and they're like, Angie, this is amazing. You've shared some incredible wisdom. How can I connect with you? How can I work with you? How can I just get in your orbit? Tell us how people could do that.
Yeah, I'll add to the bow before I do, though, because okay. I think the curiosity that you like to bring to the show is exactly the common theme of this whole conversation. And that is, go be curious in your life, in your art, and in your profession, because in doing so, you'll end up not being small. And that's what I'm super passionate about. So if you want to see me mouth off about those things consistently, LinkedIn tends to be where I hang out. I am a former nerd. So there you go. So you can find me there, just Angie Callen on LinkedIn. I'm also on the other social channels. So if you want to check out all my mountain antics, Angie on an Adventure on Instagram is where you get lots of being 40 years old, learning how to mountain bike, cat and dog videos. So that's a fun place. And please reach out to me, whether you want to drop me a message on LinkedIn. If there's anything that I would say, Mike would probably say the same thing. If there's anything that we can do, if you feel stuck and you need a little bit of a push to be curious, that's exactly what I have been put here to help you do.
Love it. Love it. Absolutely. Angie, this has been an amazing conversation. Like I said, I love that we got to connect so much, even post the event that we met at back in November. And I just look forward to even more opportunities coming. I know they're coming. It's not a matter of,
yes, they are.
When, if it's when.
Awesome. Mike, thank you so much for having me. This was an excellent absolutely. Creative chat.
Yes. Thank you. And until next time. Thanks for listening today. I'd appreciate it if you would subscribe, leave a rating and a review. It really helps this podcast be seen and heard by others.